Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1227A, and today's date is March 13th, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Elite Are Prepped and Prepared for the Economic Crisis. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, in many reports, we talked about how the central bankers, their product is debt. And they need to continually push debt forward, because if they don't, the system collapses. This is why they continually push debt in many of the countries. Now, they don't want countries to fail. That would be bad for them, because people would be looking at them saying, okay, the system doesn't work. You collapsed the entire country. They don't want that. They want to steal from that country. They want that country to suffer right at a limbo type of state. But what we're seeing right now is that things are deteriorating in this country. And I mean deteriorating in a way where the central bankers need to push their debt even further. And what we're seeing right now is that commercial and industrial loans, well, they are giving off ominous economic signals. U.S. commercial banks are currently rising at an annual pace of about 4.6% based on weekly Fed data. Now, this is down from 6.4% pace for all of last year, and peak rates around 8% in mid-2016. This is the slowest pace of debt creation since the spring of 2014. So right now, the debt isn't getting out there. The banks aren't loaning. And the slowdown is especially acute in the commercial and industrial loan category, which, after growing at a pace of 10% in the first half of 2016, has suddenly and unexpectedly tumbled to just 4% as of the latest week. Now, that's nearly 50% lower than the 7% growth notched at the start of the year. This was the lowest pace of loan growth since July of 2011. And, of course, everyone's looking at this saying, why is this happening? This makes no sense. Is something going on? Well, yeah, the economy is deteriorating. Retail is deteriorating. GDP is an illusion. Unemployment is an illusion. And corporations right now, well, guess what? They're not making the profits. They're not bringing in the sales. They're not going to be expanding. Actually, there's so much retail space, they're not expanding. So we're seeing a major problem in the debt creation area. And it's not just for commercial and industrial. It's for the everyday person. Remember, the central bank, their product is debt. Without pushing debt further and further to more and more people, to more and more countries, the system breaks down. If you ever notice on the corporate media, they just talk about debt. How many people are spending? How many people are taking out loans? How many student loans there are out there? That's all they talk about. And they make it sound like it's a really good thing. Oh, more debt? Sounds great. People using their credit cards, it's fantastic. They're going into debt, further and further into debt. This is incredible. This is what we need. And there's a problem right now. Since 2008, going forward, people's credit, well, it's been demolished. People don't have good credit right now. And this is why they had to lower the scores, to purchase an automobile. They had to lower the scores to purchase a house so they can get more and more people in. Well, they took that to the edge here, and they can't go any further. And what they're doing right now is the next phase. They need to bring in more and more individuals to spread debt. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to change the FICO scores. They're going to remove certain requirements within the FICO score to allow people to get credit. Now, the changes are expected to boost consumer lending, especially among those who are completely shut out of the market or maybe are charged very high interest rates because of their low scores. Now, this whole transformation, this redevelopment of the credit scores, well, it's already in process. As three major credit reporting firms, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, well, they decided to remove the following: tax liens, civil judgment data, starting around July 1st. And according to the Consumer Data Industry Association, a trade group that represents them, this is what they're going to do. The firms will remove the adverse data if they don't include complete list of person's name, address, as well as social security number or date of birth, And since most liens and judgments don't include all 3 or 4, the effect will be like wiping the slate clean for millions of Americans. Now, how many Americans is this going to affect? This is going to affect 12 million Americans. It will make many of the people who've had very bad credit because of this look like they have better credit. And with this credit, they can go out and purchase a car. They can purchase a house. They can get a loan. And we can see right now, this is the next phase of what they're trying to do, because they realize, well, we don't have the illegal immigrants coming in anymore, which will add bodies and add debt to individuals. We've run the course after 9 years since 2008. We can't bring any more of the low score people in to buy automobiles, because then it gets to a point where it's way too low, and guess what? They're not just going to give the loan. So we need to change something. And this is why they're doing it right now. They're changing the actual requirements for the score because they need to get more debt into this. And they're doing it right now just to prop it up for a little while longer because they realize what's coming. They realize they can't let it go just yet. We're only in the month of March. It's too soon. So we can see what they're doing at this point and what they're trying to do. Now, we talked about how the government is receiving revenue and the tax receipts are declining. We have about 6 million fewer people that have filed for their taxes right now. We'll see as we approach April 15th where that number falls, but it's a lot less than last year. And we see right now that in February, the U.S. Treasury brought in total receipts of about $172 billion versus outlays of $364 billion, resulting in a deficit of about $192 billion, more than the $190 billion expected. Now, for the fiscal year through February 28th, the total U.S. budget deficit was $349 billion, virtually identical to the $351 billion deficit over the same period in 2016, and set to keep rising this year and for the foreseeable future. On a 12-month run rate, the U.S. deficit stood at 3.1% of GDP. A year earlier, that figure was a third less, about 2.2%. Now, something more concerning emerges when looking at the annual change in the rolling 12-month total. This is where we find the following. Like last month in the LTM period ended February 28th, total federal revenues tracked as government receipts on the Treasury statement were $3.275 trillion. This amount was 1.1% lower than the $3.31 trillion reported 1 year ago, and is the third consecutive month of annual receipt declines. This was the biggest drop since the summer of 2008. At the same time, government spending rose by 3.8%. Now, you're listening to this and saying, well, why is this all important? Well, every time since at least 1970, when government receipts have turned negative on an annual basis, the U.S. was on the cusp or already in a recession. And the last time government receipts turned negative, guess when that was? July 2008. What does that tell you? It tells us that we've been in a recession. We've been in a recession since the beginning of last year, probably around the March time period. And here we are in 2017. But it's all being covered up. If we go back to 2008, the recession really started in 2007, or getting close to that point. In the beginning of 2008, they were touching upon the recession. In July of 2008, they were already in the recession. So the recession didn't start in October or April of 2009. It started way before that. We've been in a recession. Now, what's very interesting is that Japan, the EU, and the Fed, they're going to start tapering QE. Now, of course, the Fed says they've already tapered. They're not doing QE, but we know they're doing this covertly. We know the EU is still pushing QE. We know Japan is pushing QE, but all the central banks decided to do this all together. And what this means is they're getting rid of the drugs, which tells us they're ready to bring the economy down. Now, this economy is already weak. We're in a recession. We just shown that we are in a recession. We've been looking at all the economic indicators that are showing that we are in a recession. And each one builds upon the other. Almost like in 2008, when those individuals were looking at the subprime securities saying, okay, the AAA mortgages, this whole thing is garbage. The real estate market, it's going to completely fold and implode on itself. And when they looked at everything, of course, they had dates saying, okay, we think it's going to happen here. And they're like scratching their heads like, how did the government, how did the central bank, how did they keep it going for so long? Because they thought it was going to come down. I mean, eventually it did. We went into the Great Recession, but they couldn't understand how they were able to keep the illusion alive when everything was complete garbage. Well, the same thing's happening now. And behind the scenes, people didn't see what was happening. They just thought everything was going to keep going the way it was going. Today, everyone believes that everything is going to keep going the way it's going. But behind the scenes, we're seeing that everything is falling apart and falling apart rapidly. And we can see what the Fed and the other central banks are preparing to do. They're going to stop the drugs. And when you take someone off the drugs, well, guess what happens? Things start to go wrong. They withdraw. They can't handle it. Their system implodes. That's what's going to happen here. And we've talked about what is happening in China in past reports where we see that there's a credit problem. UBS said that the credit impulse is below zero. It entered the negative area, signaling a huge problem. We see Chinese credit relative to GDP. Well, that has doubled in the past decade to 300%. And the rate of Chinese credit is completely unsustainable. And we really can't reverse it without completely destroying the economy. And we know that China has been continually keeping the credit markets continually flowing. And at this point, since the credit impulse has dropped below zero into the negative territory, it shows us that credit's going to start freezing up. And the World Bank is saying, listen, the entire global growth right now is slowing, and we're heading towards some type of depression because all of this new debt requires robust economic strength to shoulder the weight, and it's just not there. Because the world economy, the global economy, does not have the strength to shoulder this amount of debt that we have right now and the new debt that's being piled on. So from everything that we've been looking at, with the lowered tax receipts coming into the government signaling a recession, from the credit impulse going below zero, from all the other economic indicators, we're headed towards a collapse. And the elite, they've been preparing for this all along. They knew since 2008 that this was going to happen. The central bank knew that this was going to happen because if there was not a bailout at that time, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars produced and given to all the banks, given to all the other corporations, given to all the governments, the system would have come down. The system would have imploded. Jobs would have been lost. Banks would have been shut down. The whole system would have come down. So what the central bankers have done, what the deep state have done, they have kicked the can down the road to this point so they can get prepared, ready. They were able to get assets for paper and ink. They were able to put other countries into debt, steal their natural resources, get land. They did whatever they had to do, get gold. They did what they had to do to get prepared because they knew eventually what was going to happen was the dollar was going to disappear. The currency was going to implode. And they knew it. They tricked everyone, but they knew this was going to happen. And they got prepared while everyone else was believing that everything was fine. So get prepared, become your own central bank, like Greg Manarino says. Get your gold, get your silver, and if you're into Bitcoin, do Bitcoin also. It's nice to be diversified. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.